The massive alien warship floated in the darkness of space like a sleeping giant. Its metal hull caught the distant light of Earth's sun, creating patterns that spoke of countless victories across the galaxy. Commander Velthor stood on the bridge, his forearms crossed behind his back as he studied the small blue planet below. Another primitive world, he muttered to himself. This should be simple. The Zephyrian Confederation had done this dance 1,000 times before. They would arrive, make their demands, and the frightened locals would submit. Those who refused were crushed beneath the weight of superior technology and perfect soldiers. It was the natural order of things. "Sir, sensors are picking up something." "Strange," called out his tactical officer, a young Zephyrian named Kekstar. "The energy readings from their planet don't match what we expected." Elphara moved to the sensor station, his expression growing puzzled. The readings showed massive power sources scattered across Earth's surface, but they weren't mechanical. They pulsed with an organic rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat.
Probably some kind of biological power system,"
he dismissed. Primitives often use crude organic technology before they develop proper fusion cores. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. "Sir, the humans are requesting permission to send a diplomatic team aboard our vessel." Velthar's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among his people. "Of course they are. Grant them permission. Let's see what these primitives have to offer." The human ship that approached was sleek and silver, moving with a precision that impressed even Velthor. It docked with his massive vessel without the slightest tremor, sealing perfectly with their airlock systems. The commander had to admit, their piloting skills were better than expected. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and 3 humans stepped aboard. Velthor had studied their species before arriving, so he knew what to expect. Bipedal, fragile-looking creatures with soft skin and small frames. What he didn't expect was the way they moved. The leader was a woman with dark hair and sharp eyes. She walked with a fluid grace that seemed almost like dancing, each step perfectly placed and controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried an odd quality that made Velthor's sensitive hearing feel uncomfortable. "Greetings, Commander. I am Ambassador Hannah Kim, representing the people of Earth. Thank you for allowing us aboard your vessel." The man beside her was shorter, with kind eyes. That seemed to take in everything at once. Velthar noticed those eyes moved too quickly, tracking multiple objects simultaneously, in a way that should have been impossible for a creature with such simple biology. "This is Ginho Park, our science liaison," Hannah continued, "and Mira Choi, our security advisor." The third human, a woman with perfectly straight posture, hadn't moved a muscle since stepping aboard. She stood with absolute stillness, but something about her presence made Velthor's warriors shift nervously. It was like standing near a loaded weapon. "Welcome to our vessel," Velthor said, his universal translator converting his words to their primitive language. "I am Commander Velthor of the Zephyrian Confederation. Come to offer your species a place in our great empire?" "We know why you're here," Hannah said, her smile never changing. "Shall we begin negotiations?" The directness caught Velthor off guard. Most species spent hours on formal greetings and ceremony. These humans seemed to want to get straight to business. They moved to the conference room, where Velthor began his standard presentation. The Confederation was vast and powerful. He explained, they brought peace and order to the galaxy. All they asked in return was loyalty and resources. As he spoke, Velthor found himself growing increasingly uncomfortable. The humans listened politely, but something was wrong. They moved too smoothly, reacted too quickly, and their eyes seemed to see too much. Ginho was taking notes on a metal tablet, writing with what looked like a simple stylus. Casually, without even looking down, he bent the metal writing tool into a perfect loop. The motion was so casual that Velthor almost missed it, but metal styluses didn't bend like that. The man's fingers had compressed the metal as easily, as if it were soft clay. Myra hadn't blinked once since entering the room. Not once. She sat perfectly still, her breathing so controlled it was barely visible. When a maintenance worker passed by the conference room window, her head turned to track him with mechanical precision, and returned to its original position without any wasted motion. Velthor said carefully, "Are you 3 representative of your species?" Hannah's laugh was like music, but there were harmonics in it that made Velthar's spine tingle with unease. "Oh no, Commander. We're just the diplomatic corps. We volunteered for the enhancements that make us suitable for peaceful contact." "Enhancements?" Velthar's voice was barely a whisper. "Of course," Hannah said, her smile growing wider. "Else, could we safely interact with species that might be hostile? Our bodies have been modified to handle the stress of diplomatic missions. Nothing too extreme, you understand. Just enough to make us effective ambassadors." Velthar stared at the 3 humans, his mind racing. If these were their diplomats, enhanced for peaceful contact, what did their soldiers look like? 3 days of talking had led to nothing but frustration. Velthar watched the human diplomatic ship pull away from his vessel, its movements smooth and perfect like a machine. The way it flew bothered him more than any weapon. They could have pointed at him. The humans had been polite during the negotiations. They had listened to every demand, asked thoughtful questions, and offered refreshments that tasted surprisingly good. But they had refused everything. Every single demand from the Confederation had been met with the same calm response. "We appreciate your offer, but we must decline." "Sir, incoming transmission from High Command," his communications officer announced. The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Kexmore's battle-scarred face. The old warrior had led the Confederation's forces for 30 years, crushing rebellions and conquering worlds across the galaxy. His face was a map of old wounds, each one a story of victory. "Commander Velthar," the Admiral's voice was rough like grinding stone. "You are to deliver our final ultimatum to the humans. They will stop all biological experimentation and submit to Confederation authority, or face the consequences." Velthar shifted uncomfortably. "Admiral, with respect, I believe these humans are more dangerous than our first assessment suggested. Their diplomats showed signs of extensive biological modification. If their peaceful representatives are enhanced, their military forces might be dangerous." Admiral Kexmore's laugh was like breaking glass. "They're primitives who've barely left their home star system. I'm sending the 47th Battle Fleet to reinforce you. Elite soldiers, Commander. Warriors. Bred for war across 100 worlds. If the humans want to fight, they'll learn what real warriors look like." The transmission ended, leaving Velthar staring at the empty screen. He felt cold despite the warm air of the bridge. The 47th Battle Fleet was legendary throughout the Confederation. They had broken the siege of Antera Prime, crushed the Centauri Rebellion, and conquered the Void Kingdoms. Their soldiers were genetically perfect, bred in laboratories and trained from birth to be living weapons. Within hours, space around Earth filled with massive ships. Dreadnoughts, the size of small cities, appeared through jump gates, their hulls bristling with weapons. The 47th Battle Fleet had arrived. Their reputation preceded them like a dark cloud. General Xeron, commander of the 47th, was a giant even by Confederation standards. His body had been modified for war, with extra arms for wielding multiple weapons and armor grafted directly onto his bones. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 1,000 victories. "These humans will learn respect," he announced to his fleet. "We have conquered species that ruled galaxies. We have broken empires that lasted for millennia. One primitive world will not challenge the might of the Confederation." The ultimatum was transmitted to Earth on all frequencies. The message was simple: surrender or be destroyed. The Confederation had given them this choice 1,000 times before. Most species chose wisely and lived. The few that didn't became cautionary tales. Earth's response came quickly. It was so brief that the communications officer read it twice to make sure he had it right. "We respectfully decline. Prepare to receive our response team." Velthar stared at the message, his mind racing. "Response team," he muttered. "It's not military units, not soldiers, not warriors. Response team." The approaching Earth ships were nothing like what anyone expected. They were smaller than the Confederation's massive warships, built more like transport vessels than weapons of war. But something about the way they moved made veteran warriors nervous. "Sir," the tactical officer called out, his voice uncertain. "The human ships are moving in a formation I've never seen before. They're coordinated, but not like any military pattern in our databases." Velthar watched the screen, feeling his unease grow. The human ships moved like a school of fish, each vessel perfectly synchronized with the others. They flowed through space with an organic grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. "Sir," the sensor operator spoke up, his voice tight with confusion. "I'm reading massive biological signatures aboard those ships. But the readings don't match what we know about human physiology." "Explain," Velthar ordered. "Some of the life signs are wrong, sir. Bone density that's 3 times normal human levels. Cardiovascular systems that have been completely redesigned. Neural activity that's off the charts. And sir, the operators," voice dropped to a whisper, "some of them aren't reading as fully human anymore." General Thaxron's laughter boomed across the communication channels. "Let them come. My warriors have faced every type of enemy in the galaxy. Enhanced or not, they're still just primitives playing with forces they don't understand." But Velthor wasn't laughing. He remembered Ambassador Hannah's strange smile, Ginho's impossible strength, and Myra's unnatural stillness. If those had been their diplomats, enhanced for peaceful contact, what would their response team look like? The human transport ships continued their approach, moving with deadly grace through the void. Inside his command center, Velthor found himself checking his weapons systems, even though he wasn't sure why. Something deep in his warrior's instincts was screaming that they were about to face something unlike anything the Confederation had encountered before. The response team was coming, and Velthor had the terrible feeling that the 47th Battle Fleet, for all their legendary prowess, was about to learn what real danger looked like. The asteroid field between Mars and Jupiter was the perfect place for a battle, with thousands of floating rocks provided cover and obstacles. It's creating a 3-dimensional maze where superior numbers could be used to trap and destroy an enemy. General Thaxron had chosen this location carefully. His massive fleet spread out in a formation that had crushed empires. The 47th Battle Fleet moved like a closing fist, surrounding the small group of human transport ships. Each Confederation vessel was a masterpiece of military engineering, crewed by warriors who had been bred for combat since birth. His voice carrying the confidence of 1,000 victories. "These are untested primitives. They may have enhanced their bodies, but they know nothing of real warfare. Show them what true soldiers can do." The human transport ships came to a stop in the center of the asteroid field. They made no attempt to escape or form defensive positions. Instead, they simply opened their cargo bays and released their contents into the vacuum of space. What emerged defied everything Thaxron knew about warfare. Instead of fighters or missiles, individual figures floated out of the ships. They moved through space without any visible propulsion, each one different from the others. Some were barely recognizable as human. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, voice shaking. "Target Alpha 7 just flew through hard vacuum without a suit. No breathing apparatus, no protection at all." Thaxron watched his display in growing confusion. The figure moved through space. As easily as if it were swimming through water, its body somehow adapted to survive in the deadly void. "Target B23 is generating some kind of electromagnetic field," another officer reported. It's interfering with our targeting systems." The human floated between 2 of Thaxron's destroyers, her body glowing with contained energy. She raised her hands, and electricity danced between her fingers like living lightning. The ship's sensors screamed warnings as their systems were overwhelmed by the electromagnetic pulse. "Fire everything," Thaxron ordered. "Destroy them before they can reach our lines." The 47th Battle Fleet unleashed its full power. Energy beams and missiles filled the space around the asteroids, enough firepower to level a continent. But the humans moved through the deadly barrage as if it were nothing more than a light rain. Taesung was the most disturbing of them all. His body had been changed so much that he barely looked human anymore. 4 additional arms grew from his torso, each one ending in mechanical hands that could tear through metal. He moved through space with impossible grace, his 6 limbs working together to propel him between the asteroids. Squadron of Confederation fighters moved to intercept him. Taesung's enhanced nervous system processed their attack patterns faster than their computers could calculate firing solutions. He reached the first fighter before its pilot could react, his mechanical hands tearing through the hull like paper. The pilot inside screamed as vacuum claimed him, but Taesung was already moving to the next target. Yurina positioned herself between two destroyer-class vessels, each one large enough to carry 1,000 warriors. Her body absorbed solar radiation directly, converting it into pure energy that made her skin glow like a small star. Release the stored power? Both ships simply vanished in a flash of light that left nothing but empty space. Fall back, Extrone screamed into his communicator. All ships, retreat immediately. But his forces were already scattering in panic. These weren't soldiers they were fighting. These were living weapons that had once been human but had transformed themselves into something beyond. Conva, intel warfare. The most terrifying opponent was Kiwan Lee. He moved through the battle as if time itself had slowed down around him. His neural modifications allowed him to process information at incredible speeds, making him able to see attacks before they happened. He didn't just dodge the weapons fire aimed at him, he countered attacks. Before the enemy had finished forming the thought to shoot, a massive battlecruiser turned its main guns toward him, preparing to fire a beam that could cut through an asteroid. Kiwan was already moving before the weapon charged, positioning himself exactly where he needed to be. When the beam fired, he used a piece of floating debris as a mirror, reflecting the energy back at the ship that had fired it. The battlecruiser exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the entire asteroid field. When the surviving Confederation ships finally limped away from the battle, Thaxron stared at his casualty reports in disbelief. 70% losses against a force that was 1/10 their size. Perfect warriors, bred for conquest across 100 worlds, had been systematically destroyed by a handful of modified humans. Sir, his communications officer whispered, we're receiving a transmission from the humans. The screen flickered to life, showing Kiwan Lee's face. He looked completely calm, his eyes holding the kind of patience that suggested vast intelligence. There wasn't a scratch on him, despite having just single-handedly destroyed 3 warships. We are prepared to accept your surrender, he said simply, his voice carrying no anger or hatred. These were our volunteers from the civilian defense program. We haven't deployed our actual military assets yet. Daxtron felt his blood turn to ice. These monsters had been civilians. The Great Hall of the Confederation Council had never seen such panic. Leaders from across the galaxy sat around the massive circular table, their faces showing fear that had been building for days. The holographic display in the center showed footage from the asteroid field battle, playing the same horrifying scenes over and over. Chief Scientist Morvik stood at the center of the room, his multiple eyes blinking rapidly as he delivered his report. His voice shook despite his attempts to remain calm. The humans have turned their own bodies into weapons, he said, pointing at the display. The modifications we observed should be impossible. Their organic systems cannot support such extreme changes. Energy requirements alone should kill them, yet they do support them, Admiral Kexmore interrupted, his scarred face grim. And they're using these modifications to destroy our finest warriors. The footage showed Taesung tearing through fighters with his 6 arms, each movement precise and deadly. Another clip revealed Yurina absorbing solar energy and releasing it in bursts that vaporized entire ships. The council members watched. In silence, their worst fears confirmed. We cannot allow this to continue, Kexmore declared, standing from his seat. I am authorizing the deployment of the Apex Guard and orbital bombardment platforms. If we cannot defeat them conventionally, we will destroy their world entirely. A murmur of shock ran through the council. The Apex Guard were the Confederation's ultimate soldiers, being so heavily modified, they barely qualified as their original species anymore. They had conquered the core worlds, brought down the mighty Antarian Empire, and never once faced defeat. To deploy them meant the situation had become desperate. Admiral, one council member spoke up. Surely there must be another way. The Apex Guard have never been used against a single world before. "This is not a single world," Kexmore replied coldly. "This is a threat to the entire Confederation. These humans have shown they can turn their biology into weapons we cannot understand or counter. We end this now, before it spreads." The massive fleet that assembled around Earth was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons carried the apex guard in specially sealed chambers. Orbital bombardment platforms, each one capable of burning continents, positioned themselves in perfect formation. The plan was simple: deploy the ultimate soldiers, and if they failed, reduce the planet to ash. But when the fleet arrived at Earth, it found something that made even veteran commanders pause in confusion. The planet's surface was covered in geometric patterns that pulsed with soft blue light. The patterns moved and shifted like living things, creating designs that hurt to look at directly. "What are those markings?" Kexmore demanded. "Unknown, sir," the sensor operator replied. "But they're generating massive energy readings. The entire planet's surface appears to be one giant organic circuit." Space around Earth swarmed with defensive platforms that seemed to grow rather than be built. They moved like living creatures, positioning themselves with organic grace that defied military logic. "Deploy the guard," Kexmore ordered. "Full orbital bombardment to follow." The transport ships that emerged from Earth's surface were different from the ones they had seen before. These were larger, more organic in design, and they radiated energy signatures that made the Confederation's sensors scream warnings. The ships looked like they had been grown rather than built, their surfaces rippling with biological patterns. The beings that emerged from these ships were barely recognizable as human. Jisoo Han moved through space in a way that seemed to break the laws of physics. She would appear in one location, then instantly be somewhere else entirely, as if she existed in multiple dimensions at once. Her attacks bypassed conventional shields and armor, striking from angles that shouldn't exist. Sung Min had undergone a transformation that turned him into something resembling a living ecosystem. His body hosted dozens of different organisms, each one designed for a specific combat role. When the Apex Guard soldiers tried to engage him, they found themselves fighting not one opponent, but an entire biological network that adapted to their tactics faster than they could change them. Some of the organisms on his body produced acid that ate through the guard's armor. Others generated electromagnetic pulses that disrupted their weapons. Still others released toxins perfectly designed to affect their enhanced biology. It was as if he had become a walking laboratory of biological warfare. Most disturbing of all was Dana Wu, who had volunteered for neural integration with quantum processing systems. She moved through the battle with impossible precision, her enhanced mind calculating every possible outcome simultaneously. She didn't just predict her opponent's moves, she knew them before they did. When an Apex Guard soldier raised his weapon to fire, Dana was already moving to where the shot would miss. When another tried to flank her, she had already positioned herself to counter the attack. She fought like someone who could see the future, because in a way, she could. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, his voice breaking with disbelief. "The Apex Guard is requesting immediate extraction. They're afraid." Kexmore stared at the tactical display, watching his ultimate soldiers flee from opponents that defied every principle of warfare he understood. The Apex Guard, who had never known defeat, were running in terror from modified humans who had turned their own bodies into weapons beyond imagination. "Begin orbital bombardment," he whispered. "Burn the planet." A massive orbital bombardment. Platforms hung in space like metal gods of destruction. Each one was the size of a city, bristling with weapons that could burn entire continents to ash. They had been used to end rebellions, erase civilizations, crush any world that dared to challenge the Confederation's power. Admiral Kexmore stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the weapons charge with deadly energy. The whine of the charging systems filled the air, a sound that had become the last thing many worlds ever heard. "All platforms report ready, sir," his weapons officer announced. Kexmore stared at the blue planet below, its surface covered in those strange geometric patterns that pulsed with organic light. Whatever these humans had become, whatever impossible modifications they had made to themselves, it would end here. Nothing could survive the concentrated firepower of an entire orbital bombardment fleet. "Fire," he commanded. The energy beams lanced down toward Earth's surface, carrying enough power to crack continents and boil oceans. The light was so bright it hurt to look at directly, even through the filtered view screens. This was the ultimate expression of the Confederation's might. The final answer to any species that refused to submit. The beams struck the geometric patterns that covered Earth's surface and simply stopped. The deadly energy that should have burned through rock and metal was absorbed by the patterns, converted into something else, and fed back into the global network that covered the planet. "Impossible," Kexmore breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "No planetary shield can withstand that kind of focused bombardment." "Sir," his science officer called out, his voice filled with terror, "those patterns aren't technological, they're biological. The entire planet's surface is covered in modified human tissue." The words hit Kexmore like a physical blow. He stared at the tactical display, trying to process what he was seeing. The geometric patterns weren't machines or energy shields. They were living tissue, somehow modified to absorb and redirect the massive energy of orbital bombardment. On the main screen, Earth's surface began to shift and change. The geometric patterns rearranged themselves, flowing like water across the planet's surface. Something vast began to emerge from the crust, rising up through the patterns like a mountain being born. It was a face, recognizably human but kilometers across, composed of millions of interconnected organisms that pulsed with life. The features were gentle and kind, like a mother looking down at her children. But the scale was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. "I am Salman Park," the planetary entity spoke. Its voice transmitted directly into their minds without need for radio or communication systems. "I was the first volunteer for Project Gaia. I became one with Earth's ecosystem to serve as our world's immune system." As the entity spoke, more faces appeared across the planet's surface. Dozens of humans who had undergone the ultimate transformation, merging their consciousness with the planet itself to create a living world defense network. Each face was different, but all showed the same peaceful expression of beings who had found their purpose. "You came to conquer us," Salman continued, her voice carrying the weight of countenance. "But you misunderstood what you were facing. We are not a military force. We are not soldiers trained for war. We are volunteers who chose to become whatever our world needed us to be." The space around Earth began to fill with new forms. Massive organic structures grew from the planet's surface like flowers blooming in fast forward. Each one was a perfect fusion of human intelligence and biological adaptation, reaching toward the stars with graceful tendrils that sparkled with their own light. "Every human you encountered volunteered for their modifications," Salman explained, her voice patient and kind, despite the destruction the Confederation had tried to bring. "Our diplomats chose enhancement to better communicate with alien species. Our defenders chose transformation to protect our world. And I chose to become one with the planet itself, because someone needed to guard our home." Admiral Kexmore found himself backing away from the screen, his perfect military discipline cracking under the weight of what he was seeing. His entire understanding of warfare, of power, of what was possible, crumbled in the face of this impossible reality. "What are you?" he whispered. "We are what we choose to become," Salman replied, her smile visible even across the vast distance of space. "We are humanity, and we have chosen to survive." The organic structures growing from Earth's surface began to pulse with energy, not threatening, but welcoming. They reached toward the Confederation fleet like arms offering an embrace. But the message was clear. This world was protected by beings who had transcended the very concept of warfare. "Admiral," his tactical officer called out, "the fleet is requesting permission to retreat." Kexmore looked around his bridge, seeing the fear in his officer's eyes. These were veterans of 1,000 battles, beings who had conquered galaxies. They had never faced anything like this. They had never encountered a species that willingly transformed itself into something beyond their understanding. "All ships," he said quietly, "begin retreat. Set course for home." the Confederation fleet began its withdrawal, leaving Earth's space under the protection of beings who had chosen to become living gods. In the years that followed, the galaxy would learn to give the Sol system a wide berth. Not out of fear of Earth's military might, but out of respect for a species that had proven the most terrifying weapon in the universe was the willingness to change.